Hi everyone, this is Navika Chauda, cloud engineer, Microsoft most valuable professional, and a LinkedIn top voice in cloud computing. I warmly welcome each one of you to the 20th episode of Tech Chat with Navika, wherein today we would be discussing about Azure Static Web Apps. And to help us understand it a bit more better, we have an absolute expert with us today, John Papa. John is working as a partner and a general manager of cloud advocacy at Microsoft, having almost 30 years of extensive working experience in the IT industry. Prior to Microsoft, he has worked in big tech companies like Disney for leading the technical teams for several web and mobile applications. Additionally, John is an author of significant books and co host of renowned podcasts such as WebRush. Thank you so much, John, for joining me in today. It is my absolute honor to host you.
Oh, it's my honor to be here today. Thanks for inviting me.
Thank you so much. Pleasure is all mine. All right, then let's get started for the podcast, and I'm super excited for it. We are seeing many businesses, they are moving their legacy applications to Azure merely because of the well-known reasons such as scalability, availability, budgeting. And even Azure provides us with many options to host our web applications. And one of them being Azure Static Web Apps, right? And that is exactly what we are going to be discussing in today's episode. So to start with, it would be great, John, if you can just touch base and let us know what Azure Static Web App is all about at the first place.
That's a great question. And I'll even answer that question with a little bit of a story, if that's okay. Because one thing I
For sure.
find is that we have all this technology out there, and sometimes we're told we should use a thing. And maybe that's not the right thing we should use. So, what I look for is in my career, there's been many times where I've worked on engineering teams where I'm building an application, a web application, because that's the thing I love to do. Maybe you do too. And you're building a web app, and then you've got to somehow get it from your computer up to the cloud. How do you do that? Well, do you do containers? Do you bring your own container? Do you use a containerized service? Do you use some kind of a hosting service? Do you use storage? There's so many things you can do. Vercel, Netlify, Heroku, Firebase. We could go on and on. And the problem is that a lot of times developers just want to get it to the cloud. Like the company doesn't care how it's really hosted. They just want to make sure it's secure, that it's stable, scalable, and reliable, all the ables at the end of it. And they want to make sure that it's not going to be too cost inefficient overall. Well, the nice thing is what I like about Azure Static Web Apps is you literally set a few buttons up, and we can talk about what those are, and you get all of that out of the box. It just figures out how to deploy it to the cloud. And you get advantages of security, authentication, authorization. You get your deployment. You get it pushed at CDNs around the world. And your application is fast. And there's actually a free tier, which to me is awesome. So that's really what Azure Static Web Apps is. It's a way to get your web app to the cloud, super easy, low friction.
As you just mentioned that we get so many key features along with the Azure Static Web Apps, and one of them being its integration with the CI/CD pipelines like GitHub Actions and Azure DevOps, right? I think that is like one of the main selling point of Azure Static Web Apps. So would you like to add some more key features of Azure Static Web Apps, which will also answer a question as to why should one go ahead with the static web apps? Yeah.
Absolutely. I'll just list a few of these off, and we can share a URL later where people can learn more about this if they want to. You get globally distributed web hosting, which is like CDNs around the world. So you might deploy it in Eastern United States, but maybe you want it to be available in India, Australia, Africa, Europe, etc. It's important to be on the edge. You can get free SSL, which is awesome for security. You get custom domain connections if you buy your own domain, of course, but Azure will host and let you set up custom domains so you don't get some strange URL. You get GitHub or Azure DevOps integration for your own CI/CD programs, which I know we're going to talk about more. Authentication, authorization, backend routing rules. You get preview environments, or what I call like different staging environments, for example. And there's more too.
Yeah. That's true, and I think we would be covering a couple of them in the podcast as well in a couple of minutes. But as we talk about the CI/CD pipelines, I think it's good to take this up as a separate question altogether. That what is the deployment process of Azure Static Web App looks like, because definitely it's like it's up there as the resource on the portal. Having said that, it has its linkage and integration with other resources as well, naming
Yeah.
GitHub Actions. So what does that deployment process actually looks like?
Well, out of the box, there's a couple options. Like everything, and this is kind of just the world we live in with tech. Sometimes you're like, just tell me the right way to do it. But there's always a couple of options. I'll tell you the way, my preferred way, and kind of out of the box, and that's it uses GitHub Actions. Now, the nice thing is, if you've never used GitHub Actions before, it'll actually set it up for you. So when you create your static web app or your SWA, your SWA, when you do that, you can do it through Visual Studio Code or Visual Studio, or right in the Azure portal, or through CLI, whatever your favorite development environment is. I like VS Code. I'll use the extension for static web apps to create it. And it'll ask me a few questions like, hey, what kind of app are you using? React, Angular, Blazor, what is your web app? And then it'll ask you questions about, okay, so you're using React, where's your deployment folder? Like, where can I find the HTML and CSS, for example? And you tell it these things, and then it sets up the GitHub action in the background so that when you push to CI/CD, to push to GitHub, it'll automatically call the GitHub action and then push that to a build server up in the cloud that Microsoft just gives you behind the scenes. It builds the code and then deploys that to Azure. So the CI/CD is kind of done for you, but the good news is you still have access to that GitHub action. So if GitHub Actions, you can go in there and tweak it yourself. But it's all through GitHub Actions by default.
By default. And in case we want to use Azure DevOps instead of GitHub Actions?
Yes, you can also do that as well, and bring your own and do a custom deployment process.
All right. So in that case, is there a way to customize customize this entire process while the creation of Azure Static Web Apps?
I haven't done it through the VS Code extension that way, but I know you can do after the fact. I'd have to look into it more to see, can you do that while you're creating it, or do you have to create it and then go customize that?
That's nice. I would like to delve a bit more into these CI/CD pipelines. It'll be good to understand a bit, if we delve a bit more into it, that what is the internal workflow of CI/CD pipeline looks like from the perspective of definitely Azure Static Web Apps, and how does it actually, supports the multi-environment deployments?
Sure. Let me talk about that, but let me add one more thing about Azure DevOps that I mentioned, that I haven't done it through VS Code. I've done it through the portal. So if you, because you can also just go to the Azure website and create a static web app. If you do it from there, that's where I've created Azure DevOps before. So if you're looking to do that, absolutely go there.
Okay, via the portal.
Yeah, through the portal, the website, which is, So then if you want to customize or look at your workflow, again, by default, what'll happen is, as you have a branch on GitHub, usually maybe it's your main branch or whatever, or some development branch, you can automatically make it such that on your main branch, by default, it will automatically, every time you commit or merge a pull request, it'll automatically kick off your build process, whatever your build is, like maybe it's NPM build.
Yeah.
It'll then run that over to the build server and then deploy the assets, maybe it's your images, CSS, fonts, whatever, to the Azure cloud where it's hosted. Alternatively, you can also set up like a preview branch, as we were talking about. So maybe I've got a development branch and I want to test it out, but I don't want to mess up the main branch. So everything over here is working. I want to make sure that I'm testing new features, so I can create my my development branch. When I commit to that and push it, it'll automatically by default allow you to create a preview version of it, and you get like a special URL. It actually shows up in a link in the comments of your pull request, and it'll show, hey, your thing's been pushed here. So your live site is still running, but at the same time, you can go check out your preview site as well. And then when you're ready, you just merge your pull request and the preview site goes away.
Okay. So once the merge is done, automatically it gets deleted.
Yep. It'll clean up after itself. And there's, based upon the pricing level of which static web apps you get more preview environments. I believe with free, you get 1 or 2 preview environments. I'd have to go look at that. And
Okay.
if you do a paid version of Azure Static Web Apps, you get more than that.
So when you say one or two preview environments, you mean that we can just utilize this particular preview environment option only twice?
No, it's how many branches. For example, if I have a development branch and a main branch, that would count as
Mm-hmm.
a live site and one preview site. And you can keep pushing to that preview site as many times as you want.
Oh, okay.
But if, let's say, I've got a development branch A, development branch B, development branch C, D, E, and F, like if I have multiple staging environments, if you will,
Mm-hmm.
um,
Mm-hmm.
there's once you get to a certain number, you have to go to get the upgraded version of it.
Okay. I think in that case, it's like we can like, you can correct me if I'm wrong. It's like for the dev one, not necessary to go in with the preview option, right? Uh,
Right.
then not even for the, like, one can go for the pre-production, right? Or for the production branch when you don't want to mess up with the production. At least dev is as is for the testing, right? So just in order to be very careful with the number of preview branches, we can utilize it during the production phase, during the pre-production and production.
Yeah, you can. And I've had situations where I exceed the preview URLs because certain branches are still open, and it just won't create another one. If I create another branch, it won't create another preview for me. And all I have to do if I wanted to create one is I have to turn off the other one and turn on one. So you can get around it pretty easily. The reason this service is there, just kind of explain it, is I've worked at companies like Disney in the past, for example. And when I was at Disney, we had 7 staging environments, like all sorts of staging environments. So if you need,
Hmm.
QA and pre-QA, and you got, integration testing sites and
Hmm.
pre-production, and then you've got production A and B, you have
Hmm.
all these different environments, you can do that. Obviously, you're
Hmm.
going to pay for that then. And I believe, I'm
Obviously.
just looking at the pricing page, I believe that's like $9 a month. It's still not that expensive.
Yeah, yeah,
But if you don't
definitely.
need it, it's free. So
Yeah, that's cool. All right. Thank you so much for the explanation. I was just wondering, as I said in the beginning as well during the introduction, that Azure provides us with many options to host our web applications, right? It could be
mhm.
Azure App Service, virtual machines. Then we have AKS, Azure Functions, etc., etc., and then one of them being Azure Static Web App. My question to you is: in what scenarios should one go ahead with Azure Static Web Apps? Like, when to use it?
It's a really good question. So it's really personal based upon your needs. I wouldn't say that everybody should use it all the time.
Yeah.
Where it worked, I'll give you another scenario. I used to work with a bunch of applications that were the budget was really small, and to purchase a server, a dedicated VM or an app service or a container, and host it on a website, if it was going to cost $100 a month to do that or $50 a month to do that over the year, maybe the budget wasn't there to spend $1,000 a year on this, and maybe the business need didn't justify it. Well, with static web apps, again, for $9 a month, you can get the upper level of the pricing. So for $100 a year, you could do it. So in some cases, it's I need my site to be live, but it's not like mission critical. It's not like Amazon.com, right? You're not going to go there. But at the same time, I think it's also great for some mission critical apps that are out there, which uh, don't need a full back end. So if your APIs can be handled with serverless functions, it's a great way to do it. One of my favorite designs for this is if I have a web application that has serverless functions using Azure Functions, which you can either bring your own if they already exist, bring your own functions in, or use the ones that kind of come out of the box with that you can customize through Azure Static Web Apps, and then use those to point to your back end, like your Java, PHP, .NET. Like your back end may have multiple. Again, when I worked at Disney, we had 30, 40 years of back end APIs. They weren't going to move. So we were building front ends with web and then using like serverless functions to then go call those. So in that environment, this is a really inexpensive way to get global scale with really fast apps.
Okay.
I,
So,
I and to give you a short answer, I'm sorry, Navika, I would say I
that's
start there. When I start deploying to Azure, the first thing I do is say, will static web apps be what I need? And I look there first. If I need to deploy my own code, like my own back end and containers, then I look at
yeah,
other things like Azure Container Apps or just plain app service.
right. I think even like, for example, if someone wants to publish their maybe blog sites and all, in that scenario also, I think static web apps would do the job well,
Yeah,
right?
blog sites would work. Basically, any public or internal website that you have written
Yeah.
in any of your favorite frameworks. Um,
Hmm.
Even Blazor can do that.
Got it, got it. And in terms of pricing tier, because you did mention, and definitely like costing is one of the most important key factor that any business or any individual looks for. So in terms of that, what would you say? Like Azure Static Web App is like the least expensive or like the most cost effective? Rather, that's the good word to use. Like, is that
Yeah,
the most cost effective as compared to the other resources?
I'm sure
Which
there's
is
other free things too. But as far as what you get for free with static web apps, yeah, I don't know how you get cheaper than free. And you get a lot. You get 100 gigabytes of bandwidth too that get included with the free site. So um, and you get store. I think you get about a half a gig of storage per app. It's either half a gig or a quarter a gig. So first of all, your website shouldn't be a half a gig, right? It shouldn't be that big,
yeah,
but
not even either.
you do get quite a bit there.
Got it. Um, Now as we're almost ending towards the podcast, and we have covered the what part of it, why part of it, how, when, and I think to just wrap up everything what you just stated, one important part of what they call the pillar of good infrastructure. One of the most important pillars is security, right? And I
Hmm.
mentioned in the beginning, you did mention about SSL certificates, you did mention about authorization and authentication, right? So my question to you is like, how can we make sure that our Azure static web apps are secure enough? So, like, what are the best security practices that we can implement upon it?
Yeah, it's a great question, and it's one of the things that sometimes eludes us as we're developing applications. Is how do we make sure we're doing all the right security things?
Right.
First of all, out of the box, you get SSL, which is great. And there's other things that we should implement, but you also get two features you can take advantage of for authentication and authorization. For
Mm-hmm.
authentication, you can hook into some of the common providers like GitHub authentication out of the box or Microsoft Entra ID. So if your company's using either GitHub or Entra ID for Microsoft, you can automatically hook into those. Basically, there's a URL that you tell it to click on this link, and it'll automatically lead and redirect your users of the application to a login screen to
Mm-hmm.
use those credentials and then come back to the application.
Mm-hmm.
If you don't use one of those two, like GitHub or Entra ID, you can also
Mm-hmm.
connect with your own, kind of bring your own authentication. So if you have your own authentication provider, you can connect to that too. Obviously, you have to have one then,
Yeah.
like Okta or something else like that.
Mm-hmm.
After you have authentication, then you've also got things like authorization. So now I know, Navika, that you are who you say you are. What can you do on the app? And
Mm-hmm.
that's where authorization comes in. And you can define a bunch of custom roles for your application, like admin or read only user or whatever you want. And then you can assign certain permissions to each of those roles. So if you have a bunch of users in your app, all your users for your system, your customers, could then be assigned a role or multiple roles. And those roles define what they do. And static web apps will handle all that for you.
It's like basically getting into the web app. That's like the main thing, right? That's the root
Yep.
of it that's defined. Cool. And I think also just like adding up to it, whatever just came to my mind as well. I think in order, like, if in scenarios we don't want to make our web app public, or in that particular scenarios, we can also add private endpoints to it, right? Set those up to just add one more onion layer of security to it, right?
Yes, yes. And it's nice because you get to automatically create this. And if you don't need security for your app, you can also do that too. Obviously, there's some websites you just want it to be like a marketing site or something like
Yeah.
that. So you can also do that too. And
Right.
there's a lot of special things like rewrite rules and redirection rules. And you can set up a
Yeah.
bunch of rules so that if someone goes to a URL that's maybe you're replacing an existing site and you want to have redirects, you can do all that kind of work too.
Right, right, right. So bunch of things, definitely. All right. Thank you so much. I think we have almost covered all the main key points of the topic Azure Static Web Apps today. And thank you so much, John, for joining me in today once again. And before we end the podcast, you want to give any signing off note?
Yeah, I'd like to share with everybody, if you want to learn more about this, one of the things that I recommend is you go to the main documentation. We have a
Yes.
URL. It's aka.ms/SWA-DOC. So
Mhm.
SWA is static web apps. So SWA-doc. So if you go there, you can learn as much as you want to look at it, and you can try it out for free.
Absolutely, absolutely. You can go in for Microsoft Learn. I think you have plenty and plethora of documentations and modules, learning parts to just dive into, and they have some really good, content for Azure Static Web Apps. It has been my absolute privilege and honor to host you today, and it was so detailed, informative, and educative episode with you today. Thank you so much once again for joining me. And
It's great to be here, and it's great to talk with more Microsoft MVPs like you out there. So thanks.
thank you so much.